We are live right now. It is Friday once again right now. I don't see it up myself on Facebook, but we're gonna have to trust our friends who are letting us know that we are up and live. Thank you for bearing with our technical difficulties. This is us getting used to the new normal in Zoom. My name is Sasha Goodfriend, president of Now, and I am so happy to have Jo Trigilio with me today as our co-host for Feminist Friday, our weekly series during the quarantine where we are catching up with our feminist friends and seeing what the work looks like, what the activism looks like, what the movement building work looks like, and what that's like on a personal level too, not just politics all the time. So I'm very happy to have Jo here as the co-host because we've been working together for a long time, almost as long as I've been in Boston. I think Jo knew me before I even knew who she was when we were circling paths at the graduate consortium in women's studies at MIT. And then I got to work with Jo at Simmons University in the Gender and Cultural Studies department way back when I was an administrative assistant working for my favorite departments at the university. And now we work together on the communications team at Boston Pride. And Jo has her own Mass Now history. So all of the organizations really are circling here in Boston, Massachusetts. And so thank you, Jo, for being here. How are you?
I'm good.
Where are you?
Just to back up, I used to be the Mass Now newsletter editor and the Boston Now newsletter editor and layout editor, and I used to take a bunch of pictures. I was a task force person at Boston Now. So Sasha and I have like a shared work history and activist history. It's kind of interesting. I'm doing okay. I'm a faculty member at Simmons University, so I'm teaching online. That has its challenges. I miss students face to face. I have to say it's really hard doing this online. And I've heard, some people say that this is going to introduce faculty members to online teaching and the, glamour of online teaching. I think it might be doing the opposite for most people. It's affirming that face-to-face interaction is really important for pedagogy, for caring for our students and for clear communication. I think there's lots of miscommunication when we're communicating digitally. So this is the challenge. It's a necessary challenge because of the pandemic, but I hope this is not the new normal for faculty and for education in general. I just don't think this is the best way for us to build, intellectual community.
Yeah. And I know you also, so you're a professor in the philosophy department and also in the gender and cultural and the women and gender studies departments. And you also teach around data security as well within there, or data ethics, right?
Well, I teach applied ethics, so I teach IT ethics, and I am very, very, very interested in surveillance capitalism and surveillance.
We're live. All right, so hello, Facebook family. Again, you missed a very interesting discussion between Jo and I about surveillance capitalism before, but that was lost to the internet as it happens. And that's okay. We're just going to keep moving forward. We're here today to talk about movement building work over the last 100 years with the suffrage centennial, over the last 50 years with the anniversary of Boston Pride, and moving forward now unapologetically still, despite our COVID-19 pandemic. So here with us, I have Jo Trigilio, former Mass Now newsletter designer, also known for her feminist academia with the Graduate Consortium of Women's Studies and Simmons University, and partner in crime on Boston Pride Communications with me. So thank you again, Jo, for streaming in from Somerville.
My pleasure to be here today.
All right, we are now joined by Katrina and Fredie from Suffrage 100, Massachusetts. Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, we can hear you loud and clear. That is a good sign. So some of you know that Mass Now is a part of the Women of Suffrage 100 Massachusetts. We've been a longstanding partner of Suffrage 100 Massachusetts, and that usually means that we're going to the swan boats in the public gardens on August 26th for Women's Equality Day, and we are all wearing matching sashes like Fredie is, and learning the history of the suffragists. But this year is what we've been building up towards all along. It is the centennial anniversary of the 19th Amendment being ratified to the Constitution. So I'm so thankful to have Fredie, the president of Suffrage 100 Massachusetts, and Katrina, our vice president of Suffrage 100 Massachusetts, and also city councilor in Randolph, Massachusetts, here to join us to talk about the ongoing work that Suffrage 100 Massachusetts is doing to commemorate the suffragists and their legacy. So with that, Fredie, why don't we start with you and tell us how you came to found Suffrage 100 Massachusetts.
Thank you, Sasha, and thank you for having us today. This is very exciting. So this started with the 90th anniversary in 2010. Actually, when I was talking with then Attorney General Martha Coakley, who had just asked me, Fredie, by chance, do you have an interest in doing anything for the 90th? And I said, oh my gosh, I would love to do something. I know exactly what I want to do. So this had been sort of pent up in me for a long time. And that was.
All right. So we are live, but not live because you can't see us right now on Facebook. But this is a continuation of our conversation for Feminist Happy Hour, because technical difficulties will not stop us having happy hour, talking feminist shop in Massachusetts. And thanks everyone for bearing with us. We are joined again with Jo Trigilio to my left from Simmons University, academic extraordinaire, and Fredie and Katrina from Suffrage 100 Massachusetts, one of the biggest coalitions, I think, in the country to commemorate the suffrage centennial. So it's very exciting to be talking about this unknown history, I think, in a lot of ways. And this is what brings us all together, the four of us, because we are all feminist academics. And of course, we have the second wave feminist movement that now was born in the 1960s and 70s. But it's really important to look back even further, 100 years, to look at the first wave of feminist movement and the lessons learned, so that we're not repeating the same mistakes. And I think one of the biggest lessons learned for me that is really brought home as I continue to learn more about the suffragists is that exclusion as in white suffragists telling Black suffragists to march in the back, or needing to create different segregated suffrage organizations, did not work as an organizing strategy to achieve the 19th Amendment in the end. And so we can look back through lots of examples of allyship and lots of women of color suffragists around the country and in Massachusetts that whose stories are often unknown, but were crucial towards the success of the suffrage vote ultimately. And yet we're still reconciling with that unknown and unreconciled history and voting discrimination and obviously racial discrimination still in this country. And so I think the suffrage centennial is a great opportunity to, re-educate ourselves on that. And I was wondering, Fredie and Katrina, if you could share stories, one story perhaps each now, of your favorite suffragist that you've learned, or one of your favorite suffrage stories to that point also.
Okay, I'll go. And I appreciate the introduction, Sasha, because that is extremely important to me. And this leads up to my favorite suffrage moment. And part of understanding how important this work is, and I'm understanding the feminist movement and how we continue to be oppressed in ways, and how we're working through that oppression, and we're still educating ourselves and educating others. Piece of a huge piece of Suffrage 100 Mass is we really stress history, educating others in history, and we know that we cannot go forward unless we address, as you mentioned, the first wave, right? And that first wave is how we have committed to developing our strategies and our mission on how we're going to go forward to be inclusive, and making sure that is definitely every bit of inclusion that we could think of. So as we go forward, we continue to invite, instead of saying you cannot be part of this movement, because we know when the movement in the first wave, lots of individuals were excluded, especially Black women were excluded. So I feel like I'm here to change that narrative, right? I need people to know that Black women were excluded, but today we're not going to be excluded, right? And we're going to work with organizations who agree that that's important. And Suffrage 100 is one of those organizations. So in saying that, Ida B. Wells' story, yay, who's also a Delta. She's fascinating. She's intelligent. She just imagine during her time. So as you mentioned, when the Black women were expected to march and back, and to say that Delta Sigma Theta sorority was the only Black organization that marched in the suffrage parade. So that was hard enough, to march in a suffrage parade, knowing that you really weren't wanted. So then it was agreed on, okay, you can march, but you have to march in back. But not Ida B. Wells. So Ida B. Wells decided she was gonna march with Illinois delegates, and she did. So she marched in front, she squeezed in, and she just stayed focused and continued on. So that, when I think of how to break through the barriers, when I think about the difficulty of fighting against racism and fighting against sexism, and all the other isms and oppressed situations, Ida B. Wells is definitely a person that I think of to help me just mentally, physically become stronger and stay focused and moving through those difficult moments.
I love that story. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't know she was a Delta. I missed that. So, see,
Yes, she is.
Fredie, I'm sure it must be much harder / impossible for you to choose your favorite suffrage story. So, admittedly, we could just say this will be the first one that comes to mind.
Thank you, because I had this whole list, and yes, of course, Ida B. Wells came to mind immediately. So I decided I'm going to talk about one chronologically. So but I'm not going to go back to the first wave, or it's the end of the first wave, because when you mentioned, it was 100 years ago that the vote was finally achieved, but it had taken basically 100 years prior to that to get it, you know. So there's another 100 years of effort that went into getting that. So, but sticking with sort of chronologically, after the 1913 parade in Washington, D.C., that Katrina was talking about, and that was in Washington, D.C., and another major event in Washington, D.C. was January 1917, when the first people ever to picket the White House were the suffragists. They came up with this idea, they led this idea, silent protesting. They were called the Silent Sentinels. They didn't say a word, they just carried signs. And they did it 6 days a week. I believe it was 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 days a week for 2.5 years. January 1917 till June 1919, when Congress finally passed the amendment and then sent it to the states for adoption. So when they stood outside the White House, initially they were not bothered. And remember, for 2.5 years, that meant that they stood through all kinds of weather: snow, sleet, hail, rain, and the heat. It also gets very hot in Washington. In the cold weather, they stood on brick stones that they heated to keep their feet warm in the cold. Initially, they were not bothered, but a huge change was when World War I broke out, and now they were picketing a sitting president at wartime. And that was considered heresy, that they would do that to the president. Initially, there were pictures of the president driving in and out of the White House. He may have waved to them, I think. But later, it became contentious. They were arrested and jailed at the Occoquan Workhouse, also a jail in Washington, D.C. And the Occoquan Workhouse, which is a horrible place, they are now turning into a memorial. I think the original building is down, but on August 26, 2020, they are unveiling this memorial to the women who suffered there. And I'm wearing my jail door pin because these women not only were jailed, but they went on hunger strikes, and the administration didn't want them to die and become martyrs, so they force-fed them. And a couple of the women in particular, Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, had withstood this treatment in England earlier in the century. It was about 1911, 1912. And so they knew how to withstand it, but it was brutal, it was horrible. And afterwards they were awarded pins that they had also awarded in England, because they wanted these women to feel kind of like soldiers get a badge of honor. After a war, they get ribbons. Well, they wanted women to feel like, you have survived this battle, and so you should proudly wear your pin. And they did. They proudly wore these jail door pins. There are replicas. There's a couple of original ones in Framingham, actually, the Framingham Historical Society. So that's my
I love it. And, you know, Jo and I have been talking about protesting given the COVID crisis a lot lately. And what does that look like? So, you know, Pride was canceled this summer. It was supposed to be the 50th anniversary of Boston Pride, and Pride exists within all of us all the time, we know, but still being able to protest and being able to convene in public is so important for our movement building work. Jo, I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, listening to the silent sentinels.
Silent Sentinels.
Sentinels. Sorry.
Well, it's not like people cannot protest when there's a pandemic, but it does concern me that politically, if we do need to come out to the streets and gather together because we don't like what the government is doing, that we might be afraid to do so, or we cannot do so. And so I know we have stay-at-home advisories in most states, which makes me feel better. I do have concerns about the kind of precedents this is setting, and if it continues, if we do have like orders and not advisories, what would that look like if we then don't like what also the government is doing while we're all, you know, ordered to stay at home? So I don't know if you guys have thought about what protests might look like if in fact we're ordered to stay home, cannot get together. I mean, even right now, I have to say, it's hard for me to think about what might happen when when our advisory is lifted, and I mean, things have been happening. Inequality has been getting greater and greater and greater. So I don't have the benefit of talking to my friends regularly anymore, because it's hard to do things on Zoom, and it's easier to do things face to face. When Sasha stopped by on her bike a week or two ago, I was so happy to see an activist at my 6 feet away from me, but within talking distance, so that we could chat about what was happening politically. I was wondering if you guys had thoughts on it.
I have lots of thoughts. I can't say I have been consumed with, because I too feel like, the norm has changed. So, and how will our voices be heard at this point? What are the strategies that we're going to use? What methods are we going to use to be heard? And I think about the census, which is extremely important, that, this whole COVID-19 put a huge damper on the census. So I'm currently trying to figure out how we're going to get the word out, especially in the Black community, of how important the census is. Because before it was about knocking on those doors and face to face, and really convincing people face to face the importance of the census. But now with social distancing and the other situations we have to take into consideration, that's not going to happen. But I do think we have to be innovative and really creative, and not allow the movement to continue to pass on. So because we are not able to do work as we normally have, that doesn't mean, as you said earlier, we cannot afford not to do any work. So I say I'm staying committed to thinking of different innovative ways. Even at suffrage, we talk about different ways right now. Fredie was going to 200, 2,000 events a month. But now all of a sudden it just stopped. And that was part of the movement, being present at those events. So now we're in the process of thinking, how do we continue to be present? Because it's really important that we continue to educate the community. And so that's where I am, because I feel as if the movement and what the movement meant to Black women as well, how do we be innovative enough to continue this movement? And earlier I was going to say, and I just went in another direction, because currently I'm consumed when you talk about inequality and equity and the COVID virus hitting more folks of color. I'm very concerned about that. So again, I find myself being a part of an activist around this whole COVID-19, and how am I going to get the word out? And I can't afford not to get the word out. So, because now it's a life and death situation, but I feel the same about this movement that we're in for suffrage. It's important that we have to get the word out, and we don't have a choice but to work on different methods on getting the word out. That's where I am.
So I'll just add, I think that's why, Sasha, thank you for providing this platform so that we can talk about it. We really appreciate it, these new innovative ways that we're all becoming a little more familiar with. I know I am, which is wonderful. So thank you for setting this up so we can try to share thoughts this way. I will just add, we're focused on, we had been like with Pride's parade coming up, we're also focused on a centennial, on the centennial. So 100 years since it's happened. The actual anniversary is August 26th. Who knows what we'll be doing August 26th? We'll wait and see. Hopefully we'll be at the Swan Boats again, but we just don't know. But certainly we had been hoping and planning and working, as you know, for a fall event to commemorate the 100th. And we are continuing to work with the city to identify a date in the fall. it's possible that may happen, but we're also planning for a date in 2021 so that if it has to be postponed, it's not a question of whether we're going to do it, it's a question of when we're going to do it. So we want to keep our energy up and understand, okay, people may be hearing these stories this year, and you know what? They may hear them in 2021 as well, because it's important whenever we're able to spread the message and the word. We are a nonprofit, we're a nonpartisan organization. We have three main goals, and part of it is the history. We want it, this history is so unbelievable, all of the history. What women of color did, what women of all different backgrounds, white women, Caucasian, Native American women, unbelievable history, none of which we were taught. I'm so frustrated that we didn't grow up with any of this history. So we want to fill in this major gap. We have a book list on our website and the movies and different things to see. So we're trying to help with that. And hopefully, as people learn these stories, they will be motivated and activated to vote. Our voting participation rates, okay, they're better than a lot of the country, but they're not 100% or close to it. There's a lot of room for improvement. And when we think of other countries in the world, their voting records are much higher. And we know there are many barriers that make it difficult for people to vote in the States. So we want to be sure to increase voter participation and encourage people to vote when certainly to the extent they can. And we think there's a lot of room there for people to care more and to appreciate this incredible thing, the vote, and what people went through for 100 years for these women, all women, to get the vote. And the third piece is then to translate that into participating more with groups. And we are now up to where we started at the beginning of this, chatted, we had a handful of a committee of a handful of groups, and now we're over 170 partners, all nonprofit, nonpartisan organizations, and we're looking to expand that more and more. It's on our website, suffrage100ma.org.
That's right, suffrage100ma.org. Go on the website, download the resource toolkit, follow us on social media, because full disclosure, I am the lucky one that is consulting with Suffrage 100 Massachusetts to also do the coalition building and the social media work to share these stories. So
There it is. Suffrage 100MA.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Freddie and Katrina, for joining us. Despite all the technical difficulties, I know you both are incredibly busy, and I really appreciate you just giving us the tip of the iceberg of the suffrage centennial experience.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. I appreciate both of you.
Yeah. Building work will continue.
All righty.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. All right. So we have one more